Bago tayo pumunta dyan, Justice Carpio, meron na tayong bagong domestic politics muna tayo ng konti with, of course, an international dimension. First of all, what is your reading of this whole ICC discussions right now? So not only Senator Trillanes, but a number of other legal experts, including those directly involved in the ICC procedures. Alam ko may confidentiality niyan, but what they couldn't deny is based on sa timetable na ICC, within the year, magkakaroon na itong, well, looks like it, warrants of arrest na. First of all, what is your read on this ICC issue before we talk about yung mga coup plots na pinag-usapan ni Senator Trillanes?
Well, there appears to be a lot of movement because it was officially reported that the ICC has been recruiting translators from Cebuano to English.
Yeah.
So that means they're preparing for a trial at the moment because for the witnesses, they need translators because the witnesses might be more familiar with Tagalog or Cebuano. So they're precisely looking for translators. So that's the big giveaway that there could be a trial soon.
And soon, your understanding from the timetable, kasi may mga deadline timetable din yan, is siguro within the next 3 to 6 months, no? I mean, to have an educated guess on this. In short, before midterm elections, I want to be very particular. Before midterm elections, right?
Yeah, I think within the year.
Yeah, within the year.
Within the year.
I mean, imagine kung magkasabay pa yan sa election sa October na filing of candidates. I mean, this is crazy. Again, I want to also ask you, Justice Carpio, I asked Jay Batumbakal, our good friend, the other day also about this. Gaano ka mahalaga na mag-cooperate si BBM sa ICC sa konteksto ng West Philippine Sea disputes? Because if you want the world to be on our side when it comes to rule of law, rules-based international order, don't you want to also show that you have rule of law at home and you're going to cooperate with international bodies? Kasi parang weird, ne? Ayaw mo sa ICC pero gusto mo sa arbitral tribunal at on clause, hindi pwede yan, di ba? You cannot pick and choose. You have to show consistency of conviction.
Yes, to a certain extent, because the EU, they actually are the originators of the ICC. They're fully in support. They're actually financing the ICC. But the US, of course, is not a member. It is not ratified. So, hati, no? But the EU would like to see us rejoin or at least cooperate. In fact, the Supreme Court ruled. There is a ruling of the Supreme Court in the case filed by, I think it was Pimentel or Cayetano, I can't remember. The Supreme Court said, okay, the issue was whether the withdrawal by President Duterte was effective or not. The Supreme Court said, yes, effective, but there is a 1-year period where they could continue with the prosecution for crimes. Crimes committed while we were a party. So, in fact, and then the Supreme Court said there that we are obligated to cooperate. And it was a unanimous decision. We are obligated to cooperate. Some are saying that this is just an obiter dictum. In other words, it's just an aside. But I don't think so, because that goes into the very question of whether the withdrawal was effective. So if you're talking of effectivity of withdrawal, so you have to look at the residual issue, whether there is a phase-out period, because that's part of the withdrawal.
Residual jurisdiction in that case, no? Although if I'm not mistaken, the former chief prosecutor, I'm not sure about Karim Khan, but the previous one, parang may sinabi din sila, Justice, na even if hindi ka kasama sa ICC, if you have committed crimes against humanity or mass atrocities, pwede pa rin pumasok. I mean, for instance, Putin of Russia, Russia never joined ICC last time I checked, just like the US. But they issued a warrant of arrest against Putin last year.
Yeah, only because the crime was alleged to have been committed within Ukraine. And Ukraine made a manifestation or a communication to the ICC that while they are not they're not ratifying. They are saying that they will allow the ICC to have jurisdiction over offenses committed within their territory. So that's why
Yes, correct.
yeah, the ICC issued a warrant of arrest against Putin because of that.
Right. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned the U.S. case, because the U.S. obviously didn't raise any criticisms when Putin got the warrant of arrest. But now there are news that Netanyahu or some top Israeli officials may face something similar in the ICC. And now you have U.S. senators openly threatening ICC. And for sure, behind the scenes, there's pressure being put on the ICC. So you're right. I mean, it's not only that the U.S. is not part of the Rome Statute. We have evidence of U.S. senators, if not the U.S. government, openly opposing or trying to frustrate when it doesn't go in its own favor. Except Duterte is not the favorite of America, so I'm not sure they'll have an issue. Yeah, that's interesting. Except I don't think U.S. will mind at all if ICC goes after Duterte the way they didn't mind at all when it went after Putin.
Well, the U.S. has not issued any statement against the probable issuance of a warrant of arrest on Duterte by the ICC. They haven't made any comment on that. But if you recall, the ICC prosecutor before the present one, before Khan, Shuda,
Bensouda, yeah.
She was actually barred from entering the U.S., I think, because she started an investigation on
This Afghanistan, no?
Afghanistan, yes.
Violations by U.S. servicemen.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, in short, US in this, wala silang credibility or moral ascendancy on this issue, to put it nicely. And we know, of course, from the literature, the Bush administration was very aggressively against ICC and the Rome Statute. Kaya big deal na sumali tayo in 2011 despite being a US ally, but by that time it's Obama. Now, I don't want to go too much into the ICC. I only wanted to emphasize, Justice, na, you know, don't you think na importante na we show now we're a country of a rule of law, diba? Kasi if you want to be, you know, at the receiving end of international legal instruments support on the West Philippines issue, perhaps to a certain degree also you want to show that you are a country of rule of law and democracy. From my understanding, though, is when Marcos was in Germany, and I interviewed the German ambassador on this, very strong yung push ni Chancellor Scholz, among other European leaders, for Marcos to, you know, to cooperate or at least, you know, not to frustrate itong ICC procedures, since we are supposed to be fellow democracies, right? I mean, that's my also understanding. So our European friends for sure are putting some good encouragement, not pressure, if I can put it that way.
Yes, well, I go by the decision of the Supreme Court that we have to cooperate even as we are no longer a member because of that provision for crimes committed while you were a party. The ICC will still have jurisdiction, and we have still a duty to cooperate with respect to those cases which happened while we were still a member. And that's my position,
right,
because that's the pronouncement of the Supreme Court.
Right, and by that time you were no longer in the Supreme Court, right? Diba, Justice? Retired.
Yeah, I was no longer in the Supreme
Court.
Yeah.
Si Leonen,
Leonen was the ponente. It was a unanimous decision.
Right. Absolutely, which is sometimes rare, you know, on things as. But just another question. Sorry, curious lang ako. Bakit silent yung ating constitution dun sa exit from treaties scenario? I mean, I find this strange. Shouldn't that have been anticipated by anyone? Don't other countries have that? Similar democracies? Na concurrent dapat ng Senate, etc.
Well, it follows that it should be terminated in the same way that it was entered into. That, in other words, the president ratified by the Senate. But in this case, there was no ratification by the Senate because the Supreme Court said the Senate did not object. I mean, I don't agree with that.
Yun nga, diba? Medyo, honestly, Justice, thank you for pointing that out. I just find that a little bit quizzy,
because
to be honest.
In the case of ratification, it has to be a positive act by the Senate. They can, if they don't act on it, it's not ratified. So it should be the same case in withdrawal. The president wants to withdraw, but if the Senate doesn't do anything, then there's no positive approval of the withdrawal. because both must act. That's the requirement of the Constitution.
Exactly. Thank you, Justice, for saying that. I wanted to hear that from someone because for me, again, who am I to disagree with the Supreme Court? But I found that thing a bit queasy, right? The whole thing a bit strange. I want to ask about.
But there's something. There's one.
Yes,
Something.
please.
This is what the Supreme Court said. Because in this case, the majority did not object, then it is deemed to have been. They're deemed to have approved it in effect. But that's not the way the Constitution is worded. There has to be a positive act. I mean, the law, the a bill does not become a law unless there's a positive act. Unless the Constitution itself says that if the president does not veto it within 30 days, then it lapses into law. But there is no such thing. So, in other words, if the Constitution requires consent, it must work both ways. Consent to approve and consent to terminate.
I find it a leap of logic, if not leap of presumption, right? Na just because hindi nagreklamong Senado, then okay. I mean, I just find it weird. I mean, what is your indicator to say walang umangal sa Senado, right? Just because Duterte was popular back then. So I'm glad, Justice, you mentioned this because I'm not a constitutional expert, but honestly, even as a non-constitutional expert, I found the thing a bit strange. But this is important because yung update natin is DOJ gave a briefer to Marcos on scenarios on the potential warrants of arrest. But the other thing is, there are also discussions, from what I understand, about us rejoining the ICC. Now, if the Constitution is silent on the exit part, supposedly, per itong Supreme Court ruling na yan, or implication of Supreme Court, then rejoining that should be also unilateral executive decision or dapat dadaan ulit sa Senado. The reason I'm saying dadaan ulit sa Senado dapat is, I know that's your stance probably, but may bato may Bongko, may Robin Hood Padilla. I mean, now suddenly it's asymmetrical that the exit you gave a free pass to Duterte, re-entering, you're giving the Duterte people, pro-Duterte people, again, a veto power. I find that problematic.
Well, I think we have to do it right, regardless of the composition in the Senate. And I think to rejoin, the president must approve and the Senate must consent.
And you think there could be enough number? The concurrence is what? 2/3 for 380?
Two-thirds.
Kaya yan. I think just about. Yeah, just about.
Just about.
Just about. Yeah. Just about.
The numbers will be there.
And if this is after 2025 election, you never know. Mukhang bati si Amy Marcos, delikado, baka hindi makapasok sa top 12 I'm looking at the surveys. It's very competitive. Grabe.
Yeah, it's
baka bato lang at
crowded.
Bongo. Yeah, baka bato Bongo lang makapasok from the DDS camp, and let's see about the other Dutertes if they run. Now, let's transition now, of course, to speaking of ICC, one of the persons who has been advising BBM, at least until he became complete opposition, is Harry Roque. I just want to ask you, Justice Carpio, because you're not just a former top level jurist. I mean, you were part of the Supreme Court. You are also a democracy advocate, right? You are a believer in the EDSA project, from my understanding, or at least the promise of the EDSA project. How do you feel about certain people who are presidential spokesman of Duterte after being an ex-human rights lawyer, supporting the UNI team during the SMNI debate, if I can call that a debate, saying wala siyang nahanap na ebidensya na may maling ginawa ng Marcos, in a sense by saying wala daw kaso sa korte, wala daw Supreme Court. And then now, invoking people power, BBM resigned, talking about Marcos court cases in the US, implying, and interestingly, I heard this also from my friends in China, implying that the reason naging matapang ang BBM sa China is because baka yung mga Amerikano nagpakabait on issues that I mean, what's at sinabi niya balentong ba yung term ni si BBM? But wait, speaking of balento, I mean, like this is nuts. What's going on here, Justice Carpio?
Well, that's I think vintage Harry Roque, because remember before he joined the Duterte cabinet, he said that Duterte was a serial murderer. He said that on camera, and then he became the spokesperson. He joined the cabinet